Hey there, you are tuning in to the Work Cultured podcast. Welcome back. Today we've got Eric McGehearty, and he is the CEO of Globe Runner, a two-time Inc. 5000 recipient, and from what I know, just an all-around great guy. Eric, hey, thanks so much for being on the show. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got to where you are?
Thanks, Jason. Well, obviously that's a long story, but I'll make it short. So I am, first off, I'm a family man. I've been married now for over 20 years, got four kids, all the way from middle school to senior in high school. So real proud of the family. And, like a family, I'm proud of my business. Globe Runner's been around for 15 years now, focused on digital marketing, primarily SEO and customer discovery, including paid search and website development. And I know we're talking about culture today, so I think family and culture are very connected things.
Very much so, yeah. Uh, we'll get into that journey in a little bit, these last 15 years to get where you are. Um, but part of that journey, of course, as we know, is not getting everything right. And so I warned you, but the first question we ask all guests is this. What is a mistake that you've made in leadership that you'll never forget?
Well, I've made a lot of them, Jason. So that's the tough part is
Same.
picking the one that's like the most salient. But I will say this. Um, I remember this one very, very clearly, and I'll always regret it. I had an employee who was a star performer and really one of the best employees I've ever had over the last 15 years. And we were having a difficult time financially. We had had a series of low sales months and a couple customer cancellations, and we were struggling. And the employee came in and she had done awesome work, deserved recognition, a raise, and all that stuff. And I kind of said, "Hey, we're not at a place I can give you a raise right now." And I didn't meet her needs. And for that
Yeah.
reason, she decided eventually to leave. And I truly regret that because I lost a lot more than just the small amount of money that I could have ponied up at the
Yeah.
time to retain her. So that was probably one of the most painful lessons from a leadership point of view that I've made.
And how do you think that translates into the larger companies when they go on these hiring freezes or promotional freezes? Nobody gets a raise, right? Do you just think that they're not, are they just short-sighted, right? I mean, you look at a larger company, with hundreds,
Mhm.
maybe thousands of employees. Surely they've been through this and learned that lesson, but yet they pull these moves and it ends up costing them far more than if they would have just given some raises.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. I've been on both ends of that where, let's take that same time period where I had B players looking for raises. And the answer was a no, and I've stuck by that, right? Your BC player, it's
Right?
like, no, we're not doing great right now. And we certainly don't have excess money to give a raise to somebody who's not stellar. So if I were in the big company role, I would limit it to the top 1 or 2%, right? I'd say
Yeah.
your top people, we need to reward them, we need to keep them, and everybody else, we're doing a hiring freeze and or a raise freeze or whatever the case may be. So I understand the need for
Mhm.
being fiscally conservative at that time, but you have to know who's really contributing to the company's performance and make sure that you're rewarding them or encouraging them or giving them a motivation to stay with you even when you're not in a position where you can do those big financial moves.
Yeah, it's not an easy problem to face, and there is no clear solution. So it's interesting that here's a question. Have you been there again? Has that happened again and you made a different choice?
Yes, it has. Yeah. Yep. And I've retained those people. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, the A
100%.
players. And I assume by your smile, you don't regret that
No,
part. Yeah.
no,
All
I
right.
don't. I don't regret that. So, yeah. And I think the other thing that I could look back on at that time when I was going through that particular influx, we had done an acquisition. And while that acquisition had been good for us the first year after the acquisition, we had sold, we cross sold about $1 million worth of services into that other company. So we added pretty sizable chunk of revenue onto the business. Culturally, it wasn't a great fit. So that
Mm,
acquisition ended up kind of falling apart after about 2 years. And that had put this leader who I mentioned in a situation where she wasn't clear how she fit into the company structure because we had the owners of that previous agency and they were coming in. So that's another thing to be careful of. I've done another acquisition since then that was much more successful. So I did definitely learn from that whole experience, not only, not giving her that raise, but I think if I had have had all my cultural ducks in a row, I might have been able to retain her despite the lack of financial motivation.
yeah. I'm still waiting for the CEO who tells me that the very first time they ever did an M&A, it went great.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't had that conversation yet.
Well, yeah. So at least I've had two experiences now. One wasn't great, and the second one was. So
That's
that's
awesome.
been good. Yeah.
Yeah.
A pretty good
So,
track
I mean,
record, I think, for M&As.
right, right. Let's talk about the culture. I mean, 15 years is a long time. And it, I assume a lot of the people that you hire tend to be kind of the creative types. And the creative types, they aren't known for sticking around for a long time. So, I imagine you have some that have, and you've seen some turnover, but you've also seen trends. And trends have changed drastically in 15 years. So you have to have a culture of innovation. You have to have a culture of creativity, but you want to retain top talent. But then you also are faced with like, well, some talent's not learning the new trends, and you have to. So like, there's just this whole mess of problems that I would imagine you have faced. But what resonates there with what we're talking about, and what are some of those things you've had to face and conquer?
Well, certainly one of our core values is never stop learning. So, you go right to need to innovate. We knew that early on. And, I created our core values, at least the first iteration of them, probably over a decade ago. And the one we're using now, we did change a few words and nudge it a little bit. But in all honesty, they're the same core values we've always had. And the impetus to learn and change and grow is one of the key factors that keeps us relevant. In fact, we're doing
Mm.
some really interesting work right now in terms of AI and making sure that our clients are visible in AI, which is different from
Mm.
building a tool, using generative AI. I'm interested in
Right.
that, but I think what's really interesting to my clients is making sure that AI sees them and gives them as the answer to prompts that are reasonable for their particular industry. So that's what we're working on, and
Yeah.
that's really interesting and new, and no one else that I know of is doing anything like that right now. So
Wow.
um, being innovative and being on the forefront of technology and what's changing does keep us relevant because we're a digital agency. We're not your traditional brand agency that's going to run a TV ad. That's
Mhm.
not what we do. So we have a blend of people that are both creative and very technical, right? And so that talent group, thankfully, is usually a curious-minded person. And so we do really well with those folks that are really curious and want to learn more and constantly grow and improve themselves. And of course, you're right. Sometimes we don't screen that out during hiring, and those people aren't a good fit long term.
What has the growth trajectory looked like? Has it been slow and steady? Did you have some major inflection points of growth?
Yeah, we've definitely had a few major inflection points, but I would say overall we've been fairly consistent. We grew very consistently um, until about 4 or 5 years ago. We had a downturn, and then now we've exceeded our previous high. So, I think the agency business is it's a tough business. We're constantly, you're kind of standing on sand. And so we're constantly building up as high as we can and working to do well in this business. But it is very competitive, and I think we've been fortunate to have continuous growth with the exception of that one downturn. I did a 15-year revenue line, and we were up every single year for all 15 years except for that one year.
Wow. And um, what was I going to ask? What are you guys remote, hybrid in the office?
We're fully remote, and that definitely
Okay.
changed how culture is developed, right?
Yeah.
So
And
we
did that happen in 2020, or were you
that did.
always remote?
No,
Okay.
that did. Yeah, so we had a big, beautiful office before, which was great. It was fun to entertain clients. People would come over to the office. They were always like, "Wow, this is so nice." But of course, it was expensive, and so we did enjoy that, and it did make for a good culture. People enjoyed it. Everybody. If you read our Glassdoor reviews, everybody writes about how we had great snacks, right? So that was like one of my things. It was like have to have healthy snacks all the time. Just make sure you have, nuts or granola or whatever, so people can have, food for their minds. But always had to be healthy. That was one of my things. So people enjoyed that, and they enjoyed kind of being together. But when we went remote initially during the initial COVID, I had a really interesting moment where we still had the office. Of course, I had signed a lease, and we were debating on how much, when, and how much to go back into the office. And so once we were getting the word that, oh, actually, it was prior to the fact that anybody said it was safe to go back in, I sent out a survey. And I said, well, assuming we go back into the office in 2 months, which of course that didn't happen. It was, much, much longer. But assuming we go back in the office, how much do you want to work in the office? How much do you want to work at home? And the second question was, how much do you need your own dedicated space? And how much would you be comfortable with, what they call hoteling, where, you desk sharing and you don't necessarily have a private space. So essentially 100%, maybe like 95% of the employees said that they wanted to come into the office 1, maybe 2 days a week, and they needed their own dedicated space. That didn't work for me, right? So from a financials point of view, I'm now paying for a very expensive amount of real estate for somebody that's using it,
Right.
one out of, 20% of the time, maybe, right? Maybe 25% of the time at the most. So not a good deal. And so I just said, you know what? If that's the case, then we'll move to virtual. It was either, say, nope, we're all back in the office all day long, or we're moving to virtual. It made it very binary for me.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. Now, are you giving people stipends for co-working spaces and things of that nature,
I
or is
don't.
that totally
No,
separate? Yeah, yeah.
that's on them if they want to do that.
Hmm.
Obviously during the interview process, we say, do you have a quiet place to work? Right. And that's
Hmm.
if you do, great. If you don't, and you want to do a co-working space, that would be on them to choose to
Yeah,
do that. Obviously,
yeah.
we
That's
provide them
normal.
yeah, we provide them a laptop, and we provide them, a budget for like a second monitor and a keyboard and all the
Hmm.
other things. So and those things we just say, hey, here's your budget, buy what you want, right? And so they kind of make up kind of their own desk environment based on what they might
Yeah.
already have.
What are some of the what you would consider maybe like secret sauces for
Mhm.
making that transition in the office to virtual, maintaining a culture that thrives?
Yeah, yeah. So I think a big piece of it is having good systems in place around communication. So I interesting story. We have a new client. They're another agency, and we're a subcontractor for this other agency.
Okay.
That agency is in person, okay, and we're all virtual. So we noticed that when we get a work request from that agency, we don't get very good communication about what the details are of the work request. It's just like, hey, do this. We have a culture that says, I need a thorough instruction. I need you to tell me exactly what I need to do, and all the details, to make sure that it's done right. And one of the reasons that's so important is I can't just lean over and say, hey, Jason, did you mean this? If I'm
Yep.
in person, I can do that. So your culture has to evolve with your environment. And so part of our culture now is having good instruction. And if you don't give good instruction, we're going to push back and say, hey, we needed good instruction. And that's going to be something you'll get an IM about right away. I got this task. I don't know what you want. You need to provide better detail. Um, One thing we're started to do recently that I really, really like on any major task, any major accomplishment, the person does a Loom video describing what they did, the rationale for their decision making. So,
Oh,
for
cool.
instance, if I were going to do a website audit for a new client, and I would pull up my website audit, pull up the client's website, and I would walk through it on Loom so that the project manager can understand what
Yeah.
rationale went into it and what work was done so that they could better communicate that to the client or ask questions if they had questions or clarifications they needed.
I love that. I'm going to pick on you just a little bit because you took my aptive index assessment and I've seen your psychometric results. Uh, how challenging is it for you to be the one giving very thorough instructions?
Yeah, that's why I have project managers.
Yeah, yeah, not necessarily your go-to strength, right?
No, it's not my go-to strength. And I do get a little pushback from the team because I'm very
Good.
likely to ping somebody and say, "Hey, can you jump on a Google Hangout and chat about a project real quick?" Because I'm much more likely to be verbal and say, "All right, here's what needs to be done," and describe it to them, and then I think I've done it. Um, Now, some team members work well with that style, and I've kind of figured out who I can do that with. And others are
Yeah.
like, "Did you put it in Asana yet?" I'm like, "Oh, don't make me do that." You
Don't
know.
make me do that. Yeah, yeah. Have you leveraged the world of an AI assistant or a virtual assistant or anything like that
Oh,
these days?
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah, I use
good.
AI all day long, and
Same.
I'll, especially for complicated things, for a communication that I find complicated, I'll just put it into AI, ChatGPT. I'll say, "All right, say this," and then it'll make it really, wonderful. And I'm like, that
Yeah,
saved me a lot of time. So I absolutely use that all the time.
yeah. I remember Dr. Brene Brown refers to that thorough explanation as painting done. She says,
Hmm.
paint done for me or for your team. And like, I love the imagery, and I feel about the same way about your expression as I do about the actual details, which is I can't paint and I can't give details. That is just not my strength at all. So, yeah, that's why I could pick on you. We're the same in that
Yep. Well,
regard.
I'll tell you one thing that a cool tool that we like some of the time is Tango. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Mm-mm.
So Tango is super cool. It's a basically a click recorder. So imagine you wanted to show somebody how to log into a computer and upload a list. Okay, so you're going to go into Mailchimp and you're going to click on contacts and list and upload a list,
Yeah.
all that stuff. So writing down all those steps is very tedious and very frankly hard to follow too. So Tango, all I have to do is turn on Tango, and much like Loom, it records it, but it doesn't record a video. It just records my clicks and gives me a screen grab of each click I
Oh, that's
make.
brilliant. That's
It's
brilliant.
great. And so it's a really quick way for me to, if I want to walk somebody through a click path, I just can turn on Tango, click, 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 copy the link and send it to them.
Yeah, that's great. I'm looking that up immediately after this call. I can use that in my life. What have been some of the challenges that you maybe are even still facing and keeping you up at night, especially related to culture and this new world of work?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is most challenging is being able to mentor younger or less experienced employees in a virtual environment. So that's an area that we still we're still learning. We do have an
Mm.
intern, and that internship has gone well, and we ended up hiring her on to do some hourly work after the internship. Um, Now she's a very bright, very precocious young lady that just is a great fit, and so she was able to make that work with less supervision than we used to have when we worked
Yeah.
in a in-person environment. But I think that's a lot more challenging, and I'm interested to see not just I think it affects me, Globe Runner, a lot less than it will affect of this next generation of workers, and how are those people going to break in, right? How are they going to get
True.
started? And maybe because they've had online courses or their colleges were online, maybe they'll be more adept with it. But certainly for me as a employee, I think I would have had a very hard time
Hmm.
adapting to a virtual environment as a young 20 something trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do next, right? So you give me a task, I do it, and then what do I do, right? What do I do with myself? And I think that's something that is harder today than it was in person. And I don't have an answer yet, but I think that's something that we're going to have to wrestle with for this next generation of workers.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's really wise. Do you think that there's a difference, or that one is more difficult than the other, the tactile worker versus the creative worker, to get integrated in a virtual environment? Or do you think it's equally challenging?
Um, I think probably the creative would be more sensitive to that. I think for me, I've found like a developer, for instance, like I've worked with young developers. They're right out of school. I've even worked with guys right out of high school. They're already very good developers, and
Hmm.
you can give them a task and they can jump on it and have fun with it and feel happy that they solved complex problems and actually enjoy the fact they were not interrupted while they're working. So I think those folks are going to have an easier time of it than your more creative or intuitive, interactive people
Yeah.
that are really seeking that. And actually, their best work is when they're working with somebody else and communicating with somebody else. So I think those folks are going to have a harder time. And I know in every company has different cultural norms too. So for instance, at Globe Runner, we have a cultural norm that our cameras are on. That's just the way we communicate when we do internal calls.
Hmm.
And that was an explicit thing that I set up when we went virtual. I said, guys, we're going to work virtual, but guess what? Our cameras are on. When we talk, we're face to face. And I think
Hmm.
that's helped us tremendously. I know my father, before he retired, he was a senior technical guy at Oracle. And so his manager, he had never met in person and they didn't have cameras on. So he knew his manager by voice. That's it.
Wow. That's wild,
And
actually.
yeah, it was like a year and a half. I asked him, I was like, how long have you had this manager? He's like, year and a half. And I was like, so you've never met him, you've never seen him. That's right. Okay. Like very different
Wow.
work environment. Now, of course, my dad didn't need management. I mean, he's retired now, but before he was retired, he knew what he was doing. He didn't need
Yeah.
that level of management. But I think that would be very hard for a person who is in a creative role or more of a people focused role to not have that level of
Yeah.
interaction.
Yeah. Especially if they also happen to be just energized by interactions or connections, and whether that's extroversion or some other trait that just really they have that drive or need to feel
Right,
connected and belonging and all that.
right, right. Yeah, and we
Yeah.
see that. I think I've read studies about that where people that aren't cut out for that life environment can suffer from depression and feelings of isolation. That's not me.
Hmm.
I'm happy in my current role, and I feel like I get a lot of connection because I do. Well, frankly, I do Zoom calls all day long, so I
Yeah.
talk to people all day long, even though it's not in the flesh. It's still a communication, it's an interaction. But I can
Hmm.
see how if you're doing, maybe you're doing data entry or something that would just drive me nut batty. Yeah, that would be a very lonely thing to do by yourself at your house.
Yeah. And also there's the context, right? You're married for 20 years with four kids. There's plenty of belonging and connection going on around you. And a lot of these, kids right out of college, they have like a roommate that they just met when they moved in, and who knows what their context is, and
Right.
um, yeah, maybe they moved to a new city or moved back home after being off at college. Yeah, uh, I don't envy the people that are in those really difficult situations, and I also don't even envy the CEOs like yourself who have to navigate those waters and figure out how to create belonging and strong culture when those scenarios are taking place.
Yeah,
It's a lot.
I think that's a challenging thing. And today, because we're hiring and it's very clear this is a virtual position, the people that are applying want that. When
Mhm.
we did the transition, I had one young lady who I actually was one of my better employees. I really, really liked her. And she had kind of I think she suffered from that, and she ended up
Yeah.
resigning and taking a role that was in person because she
Mhm.
didn't enjoy it.
Yeah. It's good when people are self-aware and they know that and have to make decisions based on it. Yeah.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Well, man, we are having a long conversation, which is great, but I want to make sure we sign off pretty soon. But Eric, this has been really, really fun and informative. Before we kind of go to our last section, what do you want to plug? We give people an opportunity to shamelessly plug.
Yeah. So what I mentioned at the top of the call, the work we're doing with AI discovery, I think is incredibly unique. So we've got a couple things going on that are really exciting to me. So we've got a beta version of an AI rank tracking tool that is going to be available in a beta in the next few months, hopefully, open to more than just friends and family. I'll have it available for a couple friends and family, other agencies. But I think that'll be something that'll be appealing to other agencies and to, of course, end clients as well. So they can see how they're appearing in both ChatGPT, and then we'll be adding Gemini and Meta AI as well, along with maybe some other ones like Claude, to see how you're visible in these other AI platforms. So, take a
Cool.
restaurant and say, what's the best place to eat in Dallas, or what's the best Mexican food in Carrollton, Texas. ChatGPT is going to give you an answer, and it's going to be a list of restaurants. And you want to be on that list. And so we're building a rank tracking tool for that. And then we're also offering a service to help clients improve their visibility in those searches. So I think that's really exciting. And we just published a page on our website called AI Discovery. So you can go there and read all about it.
It's really important. By the way, the website you mentioned is globerunner.com.
Globerunner.com. That's right.
Yep. It makes me think of the people that are talking about AI on the stages and stuff. They're trying to make sure we understand that it's not really artificial intelligence. It's
Right.
the language learning model or large whatever the LLM stands for. And so that means that we have to be doing what you're talking about because it's not actually intelligent. It's not actually going to figure out where the best place to eat is.
No,
It's going to figure out what the culmination of all of its data suggests might be a good place. And then it's just going to kind of arbitrarily throw it out at you. And
that's
so
right.
what you're talking about is the next iteration of SEO, um, because we're going to have to kind of game the system until it's actually intelligent.
It's exactly the next frontier in SEO. And like I said, I have not heard other SEOs even talking about this. I've, gone
Yeah.
to, all the major SEO conferences, and no one talked about AI as the next generation of SEO. They talked about how to use AI to do SEO, but they didn't talk about
Right.
AI is SEO, right?
Uh-huh.
And I see it as a paradigm shift. I think that we are going to change from, just like the Yahoo directory was a directory that you had to go into categories to find the business you want. Then Google came out and it changed the way that people discovered information and discovered companies. AI is going to have the same effect. Now, consumers, it may happen so under the radar that consumers aren't truly aware of it, but it will be a total change in the way that we discover things. And the other
Yep.
thing that I think is really interesting is AI can handle much more complicated queries. So I can give it a really robust question that gives it all the details about, I don't just want to, what's the best trip to Mexico? What's the best trip to Mexico, given the fact that I enjoy snorkeling? I have 4 kids of this age. You know, we,
Mhm.
we, we've been to these places already and we don't want to go again, right? Given all that information, where should I go?
Yeah.
And
Totally different animal.
it'll handle questions like that. Google can never keep up with that. Oh, Google Gemini might,
Yeah.
but Google Classic
Right.
Search cannot. And
Yeah.
that'll
Well, at
be
least as of
really,
this recording, even Gemini can't. It's garbage. But
I agree.
so,
I
sorry,
agree.
Google, if you're listening. Prove me
ChatGPT
wrong.
is superior in many respects.
Yep, yep. And just for what it's worth, I've actually switched over to Claude for almost everything. I've found
Yeah.
it, their new Sonnet 3.5, I found it far superior to 4.0 ChatGPT, or at
I've
least what
used
I
Claude.
use.
Well, Claude's great. Yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting to see what's coming next. Well, awesome. You guys are on the frontier, right? You're innovating a space that has constantly had to iterate, find out the new trends, and now there's a whole category of technology that most of your competition is probably going to ignore until it's too late.
That's right.
So hats off. Yeah. Unless, of course, they're listening and watching and they're like, oh, no. Now you just give away your trade secrets. We're gonna we're gonna end off with our quick fire. So I'm just gonna give you some this or that. You tell me the first that comes to mind. Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
All right. Video games or books?
Video games.
All right. Spend money or save money?
Save money.
Mac or PC?
Mac.
Chocolate or vanilla?
Vanilla.
All right. See the last one. Football or basketball?
Basketball.
Interesting. Even though you're a DFW Metroplex guy, man, that's
I tell you
that's
the
a
main
big
reason.
one.
I worry about the head injuries.
Okay. Oh, you're thinking about your kids. You're not even Cowboys versus Mavericks. You're just like, I hope my kids don't want to play football.
Nailed it.
Bingo.
Nailed it. Had nothing to do with Cowboys or Mavericks. I actually like watching football better, but I worry about the head injuries.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Context is everything, right? Even how we answer quick fire questions. I love it.
That's right.
Eric McGehearty of GlobeRunner has been a fantastic guest. Thank you so much, Eric, for being on and sharing all of your wisdom with us today.
Thanks, Jason. Really appreciate it. Had a great time.
Awesome. All right. Well, this is Work Cultured, and we're signing off, and we will see you next time.